Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm bringing you guys a brand new track review video where I get to talk about some recently released songs that I happen to hear and have some opinions on. So yeah, I'm going to be going through these different tracks here today, just my own personal opinion, so if you happen to disagree with anything I say here in this video, it's perfectly fine. So yeah, let's get started with the first track I want to talk about here today, this new Injury Reserve track, Jailbreak the Tesla. Now, the last Injury Reserve track that we got earlier this year, Jawbreaker, was one that, as I said in my track review for that song, I thought it was decent, but I was kind of underwhelmed by it overall. There was aspects to that track that I liked quite a bit, but there were also aspects I wasn't super excited about overall. Like I said, I still think it's a decent song, but it's not a song I really care for a whole ton, I guess. However, this new song here from them, I think is much better. In fact, I think it's really great overall. I think this is a pretty fantastic song. It has me pretty excited to hear what these guys are going to do on their next album, if this is what we're going to be getting from it. I like the very experimental sounding production here on this song. I think it's very quirky. I think it's very original. It's very standout as well. And Jawbreaker also had some pretty quirky qualities to it, but this track, I think it pulls off the odder aspects in a way that I think is just a lot more enjoyable to listen to. I think the rapping on this track from both Injury Reserve and Aminé, who is featured here on this song, is fantastic overall. I think that all their verses are really great. They're really hard-hitting. I especially like how Aminé's guest verse on this track kind of contrasts, at least when it comes to the sound of his voice, to the Injury Reserve guys. I think it's a pretty great feature overall, and I really like the dynamic that's going on here on this track between the main artist and the collaborator. Overall, I think that this is a really fantastic song. I like the very experimental sound that this track has going for it. I love the really hard-hitting nature of it. I love how quirky it is overall. I think it's overall just a really great song, and I'm really excited to hear what these guys are going to do on their upcoming album, as I said before. Like I said, Jawbreaker was a track that I was I thought was just okay, but this one, I really like this one. Moving on, the next song I'm going to be talking about is this new Logic track, Confessions of a Dangerous Mind. I am aware Logic just dropped a new album a few days ago. I am going to be reviewing it. I am in the process of listening to the album and digesting it currently. I'm not going to talk about that here in this review. I'm going to focus strictly on this new track here, which is going to be from his other album coming out later this year. So yeah, I know the other album's out. I am going to be reviewing it. Yeah. So this track here, after the last track he dropped earlier this year, Keanu Reeves, which I didn't really care for all too much, I was kind of at least somewhat interested in seeing what Logic was going to do with his next single for his upcoming project. And overall, this track, I do think it's better than the last track he dropped. However, I'm still not super crazy about this song overall. Ultimately, I feel like this track just kind of falls victim to a lot of the problems that's plagued a lot of Logic's more recent output, in the regard that his rapping on the track is pretty good overall. The beat on this track is also pretty decent overall as well. However, it's just not a super exciting track to me. There's nothing really new about it or that's super interesting really that would really make me want to listen to this song in particular over any number of other songs Logic has dropped in recent years. The lyrics here on this track are another aspect that I don't care for all too much. I will say that they are better than the lyrics from the last track he dropped, but they're still, just for the most part, pretty bland and uninteresting. And there's just some moments that stand out to me as being particularly not very good. Like on one part of the song, he's talking about artists that are apparently overdosing on drugs as a result of being criticized and, you know, hated on social media and things of that sort. And I'm not going to disagree that if you're an artist on social media, you are going to get a lot of hate and criticism, oftentimes unfairly. And I do believe that even if you are an artist out there that isn't necessarily making great music, being, you know, harassed or things of that sort is never a good thing, or it's never an acceptable thing. However, you know, I'm not sure if making the connection between that and people overdosing on drugs is as strong as a connection as the Logic kind of makes it out to be here on this song. Maybe there is a connection there, but he doesn't really go into detail with it all that much. It just kind of seems like he's taking a certain problem and tying it to a completely different problem without much evidence really to back it up. Especially when you consider that some of the most recent artists that have passed away as a result of drug overdoses don't really seem to have done so as a result of hate on social media. And there are examples of that being the case, or that could possibly have been the case, but I just feel like the lyrics around this track in this particular part of the song I'm not a big fan of them overall, I guess. So overall, this track, it's not a terrible song, but at the same time, like a lot of other Logic songs in recent years, it doesn't really excite me all too much. So yeah, I mostly recommend this one to the Logic fans, but I'm guessing you already heard the song if that's the case. If you're not really a Logic fan, this track really won't change your mind. Next up, I'm going to be talking about the newest track from Tame Impala, Patience. Overall, I think that this is a pretty decent comeback song for these guys. I did like their last album, Currents, a fair amount. And this new track here, like I said, I think it's decent, though I'm not sure I would say I'm crazy about this track either. It has a very, almost like disco-infused sound to it that's kind of interesting in some regards. I like the vibe of this track. Generally speaking, it has a sort of a laid-back, like I said, almost disco-influenced vibe to it that isn't particularly terrible overall. I think the vocal performance on this track is kind of dreamy, and it ties in very nicely with the whole atmosphere of the track rather nicely as well. I think the instrumentals here on the track do an equally good job of tying into the overall vibe of the track. But if you haven't noticed already, a lot of what I've been talking about with this track is the vibe, really, just the overall like feel of it, really. And that's easily the strongest point of it, but outside of that, I don't really feel like it's a super strong track, really. Like, the lyrics themselves aren't anything all too stand out, really, and everything just kind of amasses together to form like this big vibe, really, which it's not a terrible vibe, as I said before. It's a pretty pleasant sounding track, really, when you're listening to it, but it's not a song that really stands out to me as being, you know, super exciting or interesting, and it doesn't really make me want to return to it all too much. It's a song that when I play it in the background while I'm doing things, it sounds pleasant enough. There's lots of aspects to it that I think are, at the very least, decent, but I'm not necessarily crazy about this song either. I don't know, it just didn't really stick with me as much as I feel it could have. So yeah, I think this is a decent track. I would recommend it to fans of Tame Impala to check it out. But if you aren't necessarily familiar with this artist and the music that they make, I would recommend you check out some of their previous material rather than checking out this new track here. Overall, decent track. Next up, we're going to be talking about the newest track from Death Angel, Humanicide. I was pretty excited to hear this new track, considering I liked this band's last studio album, The Evil Divide, from 2016, quite a bit. I thought it was a pretty good thrash metal album overall. And I think that this new single here is another pretty solid thrash metal track. I like the very melodic intro that this song has going for it. It feels like it's getting you hyped up before it launches into the more aggressive, thrashy portion of the song, which I think is overall pretty solid. I mean, I will say that it's not entirely new. It's not exactly the most innovative song by any means. It's pretty much just Death Angel doing what they do here on this song, but they're doing it really well. It's kind of like the Overkill album that came out earlier this year, which, while I said that album wasn't particularly innovative or anything along those lines, it was essentially the band doing their thing, but doing it really well, despite the fact that they were, you know, just doing the, you know, general sound that they always do. And the same could be said here for this track from Death Angel. It's, you know, typical Death Angel, but at the same time, they're doing it so well that it doesn't even really matter all that much that it's not the most innovative track or anything quite like that. I will say, though, that the structure of the track, like I said before, with the more interesting intro, does make the song a bit more interesting overall. I love the very aggressive vocal delivery on this track as well. It's just a pretty enjoyable thrash metal song at the end of the day. Like I said, it's not one that's, you know, reinventing thrash or anything like that, but for a band that's this old to still be putting out tracks that are this solid overall, it's definitely a good song overall. I'd recommend this to fans of the band, thrash metal fans in general. Definitely worth a listen. Moving on, next track we're going to be talking about is this new song from Amon and Amarth, Raven's Flight. It's overall a pretty typical song from these guys. I mean, it's kind of like the Death Angel track I was just talking about in the regard that it's just the band kind of doing their own thing, but it's just kind of the typical sound that they do. However, unlike that Death Angel track, I don't really feel like this new song here is as exciting or interesting overall. It doesn't feel as tight and energetic and enjoyable, really. It is a average track at the very least, I will say that. It's not a bad song by any means, but at the same time, it's not a song that I feel super interested by either. Lyrically, you have a lot of things related to your typical Amon Amarth lyrics, your Viking stuff, your Norse mythology, things of that sort. Stuff that I do find, at the very least, on a surface level, rather interesting, I guess you could say. I think it's rather cool. However, given that the band always tends to talk about this stuff, it's nothing really new here on this track. And the overall sound of this track is also pretty typical as well. It's the band doing their more typical melodic death metal sound and doing it pretty typically, I guess you could say. It's not the most exciting at the end of the day. It just feels a little just plain overall, I guess you could say. Just not a super interesting song to me. Not a bad song, not a song that was painful to listen to or anything, but not a song that excited me either. It's just kind of there when I listen to it. So yeah, I primarily recommend this song to fans of the band, but outside of that, I'm not sure I would recommend this track to you unless you're, just really in the mood for some melodic death metal. So yeah, I thought it was an average song. And finally, the last track we're going to be talking about here today is actually a remix of the track Watch Me by Jaden Smith. The original version of this song coming out of his 2017 debut album, Sire. And when it came to the original version of this track, like a lot of the tracks from that album, I didn't really care for it all too much. But at the very least, I do remember appreciating the fact that the track had a bit more energy to it compared to some of the other tracks off Sire. So I wasn't really sure what I was going to be getting here on this remix. Maybe it would take the best elements of this track and enhance them and make an improvement over the original, or it could take the bad aspects and make it worse. Ultimately, it didn't really do either of those things. It just kind of, I kind of feel the same towards this remix as I do the original track. This remix here, it keeps some of those rap rock elements that were present in the original. However, some of the more hip-hop focused sounds of this track are just increased here. You have a lot more trap influenced percussion here in this version of the track, and you have your more typical remix things going on as well, vocal manipulations, things of that sort. It's a pretty standard remix overall, I'd say. Overall, I'm still not the biggest fan of the instrumental here on this track. I still kind of find the rap rock elements to be a bit tacky, and the more remix focused portions of the instrumental just feel like they're trying really hard to be like, an obvious change of pace from what was on the original, to the point where it's just a little out there and a little jarring at times too. And Jaden's delivery here on the track is also just not the most exciting. He just sounds a little bored and uninterested here on this vocal performance. Not the most exciting remix by any means, but I'm not sure I'd say it's as bad or better than the original. It's just kind of the same overall. Mostly I'd recommend this track to Jaden Smith fans, really, but if you're not a Jaden Smith fan, you're probably not going to enjoy this track. It's not going to change your mind and make you a fan or anything like that. And with that said, that concludes today's track review segment. If you happen to have a different opinion than any of mine that I listed here in this video, as I said before, it's perfectly fine. In fact, I'd appreciate it if you leave your own opinions in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, make sure you leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more music-related content, things like album reviews, track reviews, things of that sort. As I said before, I will be reviewing that new Logic album that just recently came out in the upcoming days. So if you are a Logic fan and you do want to see that, make sure you subscribe. So yeah, thank you guys for watching once again, and stay golden.